Hello, dear students. Today we will discuss cognitive development by Piaget. What is intelligence? Intelligence is a basic life function that enables an organism to adapt to environment. A hungry infant who grasps a bottle and brings it to her mouth is behaving adaptively. The key term here is adaptive, no? Yung ability ng infant na maka-adapt dun sa kanyang environment. Piaget, according to Piaget, intelligence is a form of equilibrium toward which all cognitive structures tend. Intellectual ability is undertaken with one goal in mind: to produce a balanced, harmonious relationship between one's thought processes and the environment. This balance or harmonious relationship between one's thought processes and the environment is called cognitive equilibrium. And the process of achieving it is called equilibration. Okay, what's an example of an imbalance with an environment? Example, we have object permanence. When you try to hide an object, a child may think that it disappears, but then he will try to explore the environment if it really if it's really missing, 'di ba? Kung nandoon naman, kung na-explore niya tapos nando'n, mawawala yung kanyang um, imbalance, no? Yung thought tsaka yung nangyayari dun sa environment. Piaget stressed that children are active and curious explorers who are constantly challenged by many novel stimuli and events that are not immediately understood. He believed that these imbalances or cognitive disequilibria between the children's modes of thinking and environmental events prompt them to make mental adjustments that enable them to cope with puzzling new experiences and thereby restore cognitive equilibrium. Another example of cognitive disequilibria would be yung sa assimilation at saka sa accommodation. Assimilation, diba? If a child sees a horse, tapos tinawag niya yun ng dog, tapos pagka kinorek siya, no, maa-accommodate niya na a a horse is different from a dog. No, nakagawa siya ng panibagong schema. What happens during that process? Diba? Nung nakakita siya ng horse, tapos tinawag niya ng dog. We could say na there is a cognitive imbalance, no? Nung sa iniisip niya, tsaka yung nangyayari doon sa kanyang environment. Like when he sees a horse and he sees a dog. And then finally, magkakaroon lang yon ng balance kapag nagkaroon na ng label. Yung bagong nalaman niya na it's not a, it's not the horse is not a dog, no, but it's a horse. No? So that's an example of a restoring cognitive equilibrium. How we gain knowledge, cognitive schemes. According to Piaget, cognition develops through the refinement and transformation of mental structures or schemes. Scheme is an organized pattern of thought or action that one constructs to interpret some aspect of one's experience, also called cognitive structure. Schemes are unobservable mental systems that underlie intelligence. Try to remember this, class. Schemes are unobservable mental system. Hindi natin to nakikita. Hindi natin nalalaman kung ano ang iniisip ng bata, kung paano yung kanyang mga mental system. That's why we test them, no? We ask them. If you remember yung egocentrism, no? If we try to ask yung anong mas malapit sa'yo na object or which one has more, yung mga ganyan. Doon natin makikita kung paano mag-isip yung mga bata. Schemes, in effect, are representations of reality. Children know their world through their schemes. Schemes are the means by which children interpret and organize experience. For Piaget, cognitive development is the development of schemes or structures. How do children construct and modify their intellectual schemes? Piaget believed that all schemes, all forms of understanding, are created through the workings of two inborn intellectual processes: organization and adaptation. Remember, class, this key word: inborn intellectual processes, organization, and adaptation. Let's talk about organization. This is the process by which children combine existing schemes into new and more complex intellectual schemes. For example, an infant who has gazing, reaching, and grasping reflexes soon organizes these initially unrelated schemes into a more complex structure. Example, ito, visually directed reaching. So meaning gumawa siya ng sarili niyang like group, no? Or a structure, no? Yung nasa taas, visually directed reaching. Yung mga nasa ilalim niya, gazing, reaching, at saka grasping, no? That enables him to reach out and discover the characteristics of many interesting objects in the environment. Okay, I'll give an example. Example, no, yung pinakataas niya or yung complex structure niya. Ways kung paano magpa-cute. Okay? Ano yung mga nasa ilalim niya? Ways paano magpa-cute ang mga baby or mga bata. Magpa-pout pa ako? Magbe-beautiful eyes pa ako? Magtu-twinkle-twinkle ba yung mata ko? Or ilalabas ko ba yung dila ko? Or magsa-smile ako? So, yun, no, yung mga bata, no, they are capable of doing that, yung mga complex structures. Next, we have adaptation. This is an inborn tendency to adjust to the demands of the environment. According to Piaget, adaptation occurs through two complementary activities: assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is the process by which children try to interpret new experiences in terms of their existing models of the world, the schemes they already possess. Okay, example yun sa picture, no? Yung bata may hawak siyang lobo. Next, we have accommodation. If you remember yung sa previous na slide, yung bata, no? Example, may hawak siya na lobo. Yung lobo ay bilog. And then, if that child na meron siyang hawak na lobo na nakalagay sa tali, tapos, di ba, naka-suspend siya, uh, may air. So, nandun siya sa taas. So, kapag ka nakakita siya ng bola, pwede niyang sabihin na yun ay lobo. Pero pwede siyang magtaka, bakit tong lobo na to ay hindi siya walang tali, tapos hindi siya nasa taas, no? Parang hindi siya lumipad, no? And then, when somebody corrects the child, nasasabihin, hindi yan lobo, bola yan, no? That is the process ng accommodation. So, accommodation is the process of modifying existing schemes in order to incorporate or adapt to new experiences. Piaget believed that assimilation and accommodation work together to promote cognitive growth. They do not always occur equally, but assimilation of experiences that do not quite jibe with existing schemes eventually introduce cognitive conflict and prompt accommodations to those experiences. And the end result is adaptation, a state of equilibrium or balance between one's cognitive structure and the environment. We are referring kanina dun sa cognitive equilibrium. Diba? Yun yung state of balance. Now, in this one, kapag ka nagkaroon na ng state of equilibrium, ang end result niya is yung adaptation. So that is a state of equilibrium or balance between one's cognitive structures and the environment. Now, we will discuss the sensory motor stage from birth to 2 years. So during the sensory motor period, infants coordinate their sensory inputs and motor capabilities. No, ito yung gumagana dun sa bata, no? Yung senses niya, yung mga inputs from the senses, what you hear, what you see, what you feel, no, what you touch, no, what you taste, and motor capabilities. Forming behavioral forming behavioral schemes that permit them to act on and to get to know their environment. During the first 2 years, infants develop from reflexive creatures with very limited knowledge into planful problem solvers who have already learned a great deal about themselves, their close companions, and the objects and events in their everyday world. So let's discuss Piaget's 6 stages of sensory motor development. We have stage 1, reflex activity, from birth to 1 month. The first month of life as a stage of reflex activity. This is a period when an infant's actions are pretty much confined to exercising innate reflexes, assimilating new objects into these reflexive schemes, example, sucking on blankets and toys as well as on nipples, and accommodating their reflexes to these novel objects. Granted, this is not high intellect, but these primitive adaptations represent the beginning of cognitive growth. So on stage 1, no, anong puro reflex pa lang ang gumagana dito sa mga infant or sa bata. No? What do they do? No, they sucking, grasping, staring, and listening. No, especially when the infant senses motion, they do sucking noise and other stimuli and try to understand them, yung kanilang mga environment. Reflexes become deliberate. Sensation leads to perception, next to cognition, and then sensory motor intelligence begins. No, we talk about um, last time yung sensation and perception. Kung ano yung na-sense mo at nalagyan mo yun ng meaning or interpretation, yun na yung mangyayari ng perception. So kung yung bata na-sense niya, na-perceive niya, ang sunod na ron, yung cognition. Malalaman na niya, may interpret na niya kung ano yung nangyayari dun sa kanyang paligid. And sa stage 1, all of this is happening through the reflexes. But this is not high intellect pa, no? These are only primitive adaptations and this would signal or this would represent the beginning of cognitive growth. Next, we have the primary circular reactions or stage 2. The first non-reflexive schemes emerge at 1 to 4 months of age. As infants discover by chance that various responses that they can emit and control, example, sucking their thumb and making cooing sounds, are satisfying and thus worth repeating. These simple repetitive acts, called primary circular reactions, are always centered on the infant's own body. They are called primary because they are the first motor habits to appear, and circular because they are repetitive. So yung stage 1 at saka yung stage 2, naka-confine lang to or naka-center dun sa infant's own body. Okay? So if we're going to talk about sucking, yun sa unang stage, no, it's reflexive at first, no? It's a reflex. But in stage 2, adaptation begins, no? Adaptation begins when the baby or the infant suck just her thumb from now on. Kasi 'di ba, some infant or baby would suck yung toes or yung buong kamay, tapos biglang makaka-adapt siya na ay baka masyadong malaki yung paa. Okay, masyadong madami yung um, 5 fingers ko. Yung sa thumb na lang ako magsasak. Remember also the key terms, no? Primary at saka yung circular. They are called primary because they are the first motor habits to appear. And then circular kasi paulit-ulit yung kanilang mga ginagawa. Okay, this is an example of being adaptive 'di ba? So, puwedeng ang una, ang sinusubo niya yung paa niya. 'Di ba, we're also talking about the cephalocaudal when they use their legs, no, in moving, no, puwedeng isubo nila yung paa. Kaya lang, they may feel that this is not very adaptive or kaya yung bata biglang yung ang nasubo niya or inasak niya yung ilong yung kanyang daddy, no? So, it's not adaptive, no? Baka mas pleasurable yung ah, sinasak niya yung kanyang thumb. We have stage 3, secondary circular reactions, from 4 to 8 months. Infants are discovering, again by chance, that they can make interesting things happen to objects beyond their own bodies, such as making a rubber duck quack by squeezing it. These new schemes, called secondary circular reactions, are also repeated for the pleasure they bring. According to Piaget, 4 to 8 months old sudden interest in external objects indicate that they have begun to differentiate themselves from objects they can control in the surrounding environment. So this stage, the child can already differentiate his body, no, from objects. No, stage 1 and 2, it's centered on their own body. Pagdating sa stage 3, palabas na ng kanilang body. In stage 3, infants attempt to produce existing experiences, making them last. No, like waving their arms and laughing when a rattle is put in their hands. Ito yung stage na yung bata tawa ng tawa, wave ng wave ng arms nila, no? Even the sight of a favorite ball o kaya nakita nilang nakasmile yung parent nila can trigger active efforts for interaction. No? Palabas na ng kanilang body um, interest nila or yung natidiscover nila. So it is also in stage 3 where the child realizes that objects, including people, still exist when they can no longer be seen, touched, or heard. This is object permanence. Okay, and this happens during stage 3. Next, we have stage 4, coordination of secondary reactions from 8 to 12 months. Planful responding first appears between 8 to 12 months as infants begin to coordinate two or more actions to achieve simple objectives. Remember class, stage 4, dito nag-start ang planful responding. No? Dito na sila nagpaplano. For example, if you were to place an attractive toy under a cushion, a 9-month-old might lift the cushion with one hand while using the other to grab the toy. In this case, the act of lifting the cushion is not a pleasurable response in itself, nor is it executed by chance, kasi naplano to. Rather, it is a part of a larger intentional scheme in which two initially unrelated responses, lifting and grasping, are coordinated as a means to an end. Piaget believed that these simple coordinations of secondary schemes represent the earliest form of goal-directed behavior and thus true problem solving. And it starts with stage 4. Next, we have stage 5, or tertiary circular reactions, from 12 to 18 months. Between 12 and 18 months of age, infants begin to actively experiment with objects and try to invent new methods of solving problems or reproducing interesting results. For example, an infant who had originally squeezed a rubber duck to make it quack may now decide to drop it, step on it, and crush it with a pillow to see whether these actions will have the same or different effects on the toy. Or she may learn from her explorations that flinging is more efficient than spitting as a means of getting food to stick to the wall. Although parents may be less than thrilled by such exciting new cognitive advances, these trial and error exploratory schemes, called tertiary circular reactions, reflect an infant's active curiosity, her strong motivation to learn about the way things work. Or in some um, cases, no, this stage 5, yung mga bata, they are termed as little scientists. Okay, so anong ginawa ng bata? Nag-explore siya, nilabas niya lahat ng mga damit dun sa cabinet. Or this child explored dun sa tissue na nandun sa bathroom. Etong bata hindi malaman, no, bakit gusto niyang ilagay yung cellphone doon sa ipa-flash niya ang cellphone. So this little scientists would try to experiment and do trial and error because they want to know, no, what's going to happen. Next, we have the last stage, stage 6, symbolic problem solving, 18 to 24 months. The crowning achievement of the sensory motor stage occurs as infants begin to internalize their behavioral schemes, construct mental symbols or images that they can conduct, then use to guide future conduct. Now the infant can experiment mentally and may show a kind of insight in how to solve a problem. Hindi yung ganitong klaseng bata, no, na nagsosolve ng algebra. It's not like that. This is an example of how a child can do a basic problem solving. Lauren is seated before a table, and I place a bread crust in front of her, out of reach. Also to the right, I place a stick about 25 centimeter long. Lauren, anak to ni Piaget. At first, Lauren tries to grasp the bread, and then he gives up. Lauren again looks at the bread, and without moving, looks very briefly at the stick. Then suddenly grasps it and directs it toward the bread. He then draws the bread to him. So, si PJ, no, pinag-eksperimentuhan niya yung anak niya. So, naglagay siya ng stick, tapos merong bread. And then yung bata naisip niya na, why not use the stick to get the bread? Yun nga yung ginawa niya. So, clearly, this is not trial and error experimentation. Instead, Lawrence's problem solving occurred at an internal symbolic level as he visualized the stick being used as an extension of his arms to obtain a distant